Thank you, John. It is a pleasure to be here tonight with all of you and all of you on the internet. I think my family's tuning in. And if you are, I had to wear my winter shawl to walk down the street tonight. I don't know what I'm going to do in January. The first thing that I'd like to do is to share with you all that I am not here as an expert. I don't know any experts. I am here as a seeker. I'm here to share with you what I have gained through my own journey and hopefully to have some conversation with you about what you've learned on your journey as well. So that's my disclaimer. I don't know all the answers. In fact, I don't know any answers. You guys have probably heard this, right? YOLO, you only live once. I worked in a university setting and the students would say, you only live once. And I think, yeah, each time. I can't go without having some cartoons in here, so welcome back. My friend Ananya, when she walked in, said, I remember you giving this talk in your last life. I don't remember it, but maybe I did. So when I was a little girl, as John said, I was raised in a Theosophical family. I'm a third-generation Theosophist, and so the idea of reincarnation has been a part of my worldview from before I was born. However, I'm not 25 years old, even though I'm sure you think that I am. And when I was a little girl, it wouldn't have been unheard of for me to talk about reincarnation outside of the family. Even my best friend, who knew what I believed, would have thought I was crazy if I had talked about reincarnation. So I didn't, as some of the people here for the Alcott Experience talked about today. I pushed it down. I believed it, but I never spoke about it. That's changed through the years. I had a colleague, a wonderful counseling colleague. She considers herself and introduces herself as a Christian counselor, a traditional Christian counselor. But I cannot tell you the number of times she would say, well, in my next life. Really? Really? I don't think she believed in reincarnation, but it had become or has become so much a part of our everyday language that we can easily talk about reincarnation now, and people don't think that we're crazy. Or at least they haven't told me that yet. They might think that. So why is it fascinating, do you think? I'm wondering. You know, is it because with the idea of reincarnation we get a do-over? You know, I didn't do it right this time. Maybe I can just do it right next time. Or is it like winning the lifetime lottery? In my next life, I am going to be born tall, with long blonde hair, beautiful, great metabolism so that I always stay thin. Or I'll be born into a wealthy family so I'll never have to think about money. It could be. Or maybe it's really because somewhere deep in our conscious, or somewhere deep inside, we know that our consciousness continues after death. We know the reality of reincarnation. I know this is hard to read, so I'm going to read it for you. It's small. Jim Tucker is from the University of Virginia. He actually took over the work of Ian Stevenson when Ian Stevenson retired. You probably recognize Ian Stevenson's name as an individual who studied cases of children who had potentially been reincarnated. This is Tucker's hypothesis on how reincarnation could exist. He says, quantum physics shows that at the most basic level of the universe, events involving its smallest particles, such as electrons and protons, only occur once they are observed. Quantum physics. I have to read that because I'm not sure I understand what it means. This suggests that the material world may be derived from consciousness, not the other way around. Although that idea is debated by many, it is a belief that's been shared by a number of quantum physicists, including Max Planck, the father of quantum mechanics. and probably shared by many Theosophists and seekers around the world. Number 3, he says, if consciousness creates the material world, then it may not be dependent upon that world to exist. It would follow that consciousness does not depend on a living brain to exist. And 4th, if consciousness doesn't require a brain, it may continue after the brain stops working. It could then get attached to a new brain and continue on in another life. Many of us who believe in reincarnation, and many of us who believe that consciousness is not seated in this physical vehicle, think, well, duh. But not everybody thinks that way. So talking about this from Tucker's perspective, and he has to be very scientific to be accepted in the scientific world, and basing it on quantum physics is a useful piece of information, I think, to have. Reincarnation, the whole idea of reincarnation is based on the idea that consciousness exists beyond the physical body. That when the physical body dies, the consciousness leaves the body, like taking off an overcoat or a winter shawl, and the consciousness continues. That consciousness goes to another energetic field of existence to sort of process this past life and to prepare for the next one. And then the consciousness then is incarnated in a new body. That's what we're talking about this evening. Definitely not talking about transmigration, which is a term that is used to talk about being born into a different, a non-human body, like an animal body. I know many of us would like to come back as a cat, or even as some of our special dogs, because they're so loved and pampered. But that's not part of the process. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the spiritual evolution. We're all familiar with the concept of physical evolution, Darwin's concept of physical evolution. Spiritual evolution is that evolution of becoming fully human. Fully human. We're not really human yet. Kind of a strange idea. Feel human, but I haven't learned everything there is to know about being human. I still get angry sometimes. I know that's shocking to you. I still feel sad sometimes. I still make mistakes. I am not fully human. I don't have control, total control, over all aspects of myself, body, emotions, mind. So spiritual evolution is that process of evolving to the point of becoming fully human. John Algeo, a former president of the Theosophical Society in America, said, "The purpose of our many lives is to further the evolutionary development of our minds and souls." Through each life, we are expanding our consciousness. We are growing, we are learning, and that is our goal. To continue through that process to the point where we become fully human. And once we become fully human, when our consciousness has expanded to that point, we recognize, truly, truly recognize the unity of all life at its deepest level. I think I'm probably in here somewhere. Another joke for you so that, I don't want you to be too bored. Children know, don't they? They really, really know. So historically speaking, reincarnation is an age-old concept. We know that. It was referred to, or we find references to it in ancient Egyptian mythology, in the Upanishads of the Hindus, in indigenous cultures around the world. We also hear it in the writings of Homer, Hesiod, Socrates, and Plato. There's discussion of the fact that reincarnation was actually removed from the Bible during one of 7 ecumenical councils. Typically either the first Council of Nicaea in 325 AD, or in the Fifth Council of Constantinople in 553 AD. That's disputed by many in the Christian community. However, there is discussion that reincarnation was in the Bible and was removed. Benjamin Franklin, he believed in reincarnation. He said, thus, finding myself to exist in the world, I believe I shall, in some shape or other, always exist. And with all the inconveniences human life is liable to, I shall not object to a new edition of mine, hoping, however, that the errata of the last may be corrected. I hope so too, for my sake. Patton, George Patton, you probably are familiar with this as well. He believed in reincarnation. He believed that he had been a soldier many, many, many times. And he said, so as through a glass and darkly, the age-long strife I see, where I fought in many guises, many names, but always me. Oh, another cartoon. Yeah. Sometimes we'll just look for that life lottery and hope next time we have better metabolism. Tina Turner. I'm very sure that my spirit will live on in a different place as it has lived many times before. Yes, of course I believe in reincarnation. I know that in previous lives I've lived in France and long before that in Egypt. I didn't know she believed in reincarnation, but I had to go and find some females because when I came up with my list, they were all males. So I knew there had to be females who believed in reincarnation. Henry Ford. Was Henry Ford a member of the society? He was, wasn't he? Do we know? Janet's not here. All right, well, it doesn't matter because he believed in reincarnation. Abner Doubleday was a member of the Theosophical Society. He believed in reincarnation as well. Henry Ford. I adopted the theory of reincarnation when I was 26. Work is futile if we cannot utilize the experience we collect in one life in the next. When I discovered reincarnation, it was as if I had found a universal plan. Time was no longer limited. I was no longer a slave to the hands of the clock. Genius is experience. It is the fruit of long experience in many lives. The discovery of reincarnation put my mind at ease. So we're recycling. Mark Twain. I have been born more times than anybody except Krishna. I'm not sure how he knows, but I'm not going to argue with him. And Rudyard Kipling. They will come back again, as long as the red earth rolls. He never wasted a leaf or a tree. Do you think he would squander souls? My only issue with this is that it could have been she. Do we think she would squander souls?
Henry Ford actually upheld theosophical ideas. I did look it up.
Thank you very much. Henry Ford upheld theosophical ideas. He was a theosophist. So if you believe in reincarnation, when you die, instead of saying rest in peace, should we say, be right back? Halle Berry. I believe in reincarnation. It's something I've thought about for a long, long time. I just cannot accept that this is all there is to life. I do believe that maybe we are souls and we travel and we come back here as many times as we need to in different forms to evolve to our highest level. Thomas Edison. The only survival I can conceive is to start a new earth cycle again. Walt Whitman. I know I am deathless. No doubt I have died myself 10,000 times before. I laugh at what you call dissolution, and I know the amplitude of time. And Gandhi, perhaps the most beautiful. I cannot think of permanent enmity between man and man, believing as I do in the theory of rebirth. I shall live in the hope that if not in this birth, in some other birth, I shall be able to hug all humanity in friendly embrace. So let me talk a little bit about Kevin. As John mentioned, I've been a mental health counselor for a number of years, and my work has primarily been with children. I love children. I didn't think I would ever like to play with little children, but they're so much fun. So this is a story about Kevin. This is not a picture of Kevin. This is just a picture of a World War II pilot that I found on the internet. But it kind of gives you enough of an image. So Kevin's mother brought Kevin to me. Kevin is not his real name, by the way. He was 4 years old. And Kevin's mother was very concerned about him because he was having angry outbursts, especially with family, but it was starting to happen at school, and she was very worried about that. She said that she'd always worried about Kevin because he had been born with a hole in his heart, and for the first period of time after his birth, he couldn't be touched because the touch would stimulate him and it would cause his heart to beat faster and would cause problems, so they couldn't even touch him. And then at about 8 or 9 months old, he became seriously ill again. So here he is at the age of 4, very angry. And so I'm thinking in my head, well, you know, there's maybe some attachment stuff going on because he couldn't be held as an infant, and he has a new little brother, maybe it's sibling stuff. Kevin came in and he wanted to play Batman. I'm sure you're all familiar with Batman. And so I played Batman with Kevin. And Kevin would say to me, obviously he was Batman, and he would get up on the coffee table in my office, and he would jump off the coffee table, which worried me greatly, but he would say, "My wings are leaking oil. My wings are leaking oil." And he'd jump off into what he said was the water, and he would have me rescue him. I'd have to pick him up, and thank goodness he was little, and carry him to the sofa, which was the hospital, and I would have to bind his wounds so that the oil would stop leaking from his wings. Well, I thought that was a little strange, but, you know, Batman, wings, I get it. So our sessions continued, and then Kevin started talking about his hydraulics. Not sure how a 4-year-old knows about hydraulics, but kids are smart these days. But he talked about how his hydraulics had fallen off. His hydraulics had fallen off into the ocean. And then he made me, we played, and pretended we got in a boat. He was driving, and he drove very fast in that boat. And we had to go out in the ocean and find his hydraulics. And we had to get it and put it in our boat and take it back. And then he got back up on the coffee table, and off he jumps again because his wings are leaking oil and he has to be rescued and bandaged and taken care of. And this continues, and it continues. And finally, one day, Kevin says to me that the oil was leaking from his wings, that his hydraulics fell off, and that his plane went into the ocean. And he named a place. I couldn't understand what he was saying. My plane went down near somewhere. Rowney is what I wrote down. I don't know if that's a place or not, or if I was even understanding him. And I said, well, what happened then? He said, I couldn't get out. I couldn't get out. I was trapped. And I said, well, that must have been really scary. He said, I was really scared, and then I died. I said, wow, that must have been really scary for you. He said, yeah, it was. He said, and that's why I'm so angry. Leave it to children, right? And I'm like, well, you know what? This is now. This is today. And you're Kevin. You're Kevin. And you're with your mommy and your daddy, and you're safe. Okay. So would it help if we asked your mom and dad to reassure you periodically that you're safe now, especially when you start to get angry? He said, yeah, that might help. So I didn't tell his mom all that story because I didn't want her to think both me and her kid were crazy. But I told her enough that he was obviously fearful and that he needed reassurance. The anger de-escalated, and I quit seeing Kevin. Now, is that a story of reincarnation, a child remembering? I don't know. I don't know. I can only tell you what I experienced with Kevin. I will say, though, that this talk is not to convince you about reincarnation. If you weren't sure, I don't think you'd be here wanting to find out more. But I think it's always useful to have sort of our belief systems validated, which is why I love those quotes. There were many, many more. And the story about Kevin, which I think is so real to us, or makes it so real to us. The world is just not fair, is it? I love Calvin and Hobbes. I don't know if you can see it, but let me make sure. It says, Calvin saying, why can't I stay up late? You guys can. It's not fair. And Dad says, the world isn't fair, Calvin. And he said, I know, but why isn't it ever unfair in my favor? And the world is not fair, is it? The world is not fair, especially if we believe you only live once. Especially if we believe you only live once. We have a child over here that's born and raised trying to survive in a war zone. And a child over here who lives in comfort, safety, security. Why? How many of you guys do Facebook? Anybody do Facebook in here? Yeah. Yeah, that's okay. Not anymore. It's almost impossible to open your Facebook page or go down and not see a picture or a story about some child who's desperately ill. How fair is that? How fair is it that that child's sick and this child's okay? It's not fair. And that's what reincarnation provides for us. An understanding of the unfairness that is inherent in this world. Okay. If I thought this was all there was, I would be railing against whoever set it up because it makes no sense. It makes no sense. Reincarnation doesn't change the tragedy. It doesn't change the unfairness in the world. But what it does, a belief in reincarnation, changes our perspective about the tragedies in the world, the unfairnesses in the world. And that's where those implications come in for us. It doesn't mean that we quit working for social justice. It doesn't mean we don't help other people. Those are sentences with double negatives, which means that we continue to work for social justice. We continue to work to help other people. But our perspective on what's happening has shifted. So there was a family. I'm not sure how many children there were, 3 or 4 or 5 children. Maybe not 5, 3 or 4 children. Mom and a dad. Dad murders mom, dismembers her body, puts it in garbage bags, and then puts it in the back of the van. One of the children happened to be awake and see all of this happen. Dad then went and got all of the children, put them in the van, and off they went down the street onto the highway where he stopped and threw the garbage bags out. One child knew what was in the garbage bags, the others didn't. Horrific story, I know. So how does reincarnation help us with this? Yikes. Well, if we believe that reincarnation, or we reincarnate as part of this spiritual evolution, that with each incarnation we learn, we grow, we expand our consciousness, then clearly in a tragic situation like this, learning is everywhere. Learning is everywhere. Now, what that family learned, what they grew from, how their consciousness expanded, I don't know. I don't know. I can conjecture, but that's all it is. Because none of us knows what someone else is going through, what someone else is learning. But I do know that once I heard this story, once I became aware of this family, then it also became part of my life. And I had the opportunity to grow from it, to learn from it, and to look at it in a variety of different perspectives. Did it push me to fight more strongly to end domestic violence? Absolutely. Did it push me to work harder to provide mental health for people who need it? Absolutely. Did it make me have or allow me to develop compassion, empathy for all of the people involved? Yes. I was angry with that father. Who wouldn't be? That's a horrific thing to do. Horrific. And I was angry that that happened, and angry that it happened to the mother, and angry that it happened for those children, and angry that that one particular child saw what had happened. But it also gives me the opportunity to have compassion for this soul, this consciousness who made this awful decision, knowing that at some point he will be held accountable for his actions. It gave me an opportunity to learn. And that's what this belief system does for all of us. It makes us stop and look. You only live once? Really? Look at this dad carrying these children. These are Rohingya Muslims in Myanmar trying to escape the terrible ethnic cleansing that's going on right now. And this is a little guy who's not part of that ethnic cleansing. Happy, not sure where he's living. Happy, healthy, well-fed, well-clothed. It makes us stop and think, doesn't it? If we believe that we choose the lifetimes we're coming into, or at least have some say so in the lifetime that we're coming into, it's very easy to look at this picture and say, well, you know, they knew going in that this would happen. They knew it would be like this. So, I wonder what I'm going to get at the grocery store to cook for supper tonight. Or, I wonder where my family will go on vacation. And just completely ignore that. Because I believe this is not their last incarnation. This is not the end of the world for them. Although it is the end of the world for them in this lifetime. What we take from this is the understanding that we have to continue to work to help our brothers and our sisters across the world. And yet recognize that there is also a perspective that this is not the end in reality. Only live once? How can that be? It's a gestalt. A gestalt. We are more than the sum of our parts. That's what a gestalt is. It's in our perspective. It's in our perspective. So when you look at this picture, how many of you see a chalice, or what would be a chalice? Okay. About half of you. How many of you see faces? Yeah. They're both there. How many of you can switch back and forth between the chalice and the faces? Isn't that wonderful? It's all about perspective. This picture is a gestalt. It's more than the sum of its parts. It's more than what we just automatically see. And you've probably seen the picture of the woman, right? You've seen this one before. How many of you see the young woman? How many of you see the old woman? How many of you can see both? Okay, so anybody besides me have trouble seeing the old woman? Okay. I actually labeled it so that I would be able to find it, because I always have trouble seeing the old woman. I'm not sure what that says about me. I'm sure that somebody could do some sort of whatever analysis of me. So for the old woman, this is her eye. This is her chin, her mouth, her nose. Do you see her now? Yeah. It's all in our perspective, isn't it? And that's what I'm talking about in terms of reincarnation as well. It's all in our perspective. Okay? They're both true. They're both true. This life, the tragedies that happen in this life are tragedies. That is so true. And we have to work to do something about it. All of us, in our own way, whatever that is. But it's also true that it's not the end. It's part of the growth period, part of the learning, part of this process of evolutionary growth, of expanding our consciousness. I love those pictures. According to the Theosophical teachings, according to the perennial wisdom, spiritual evolution occurs so that through successive incarnations, we learn and we grow, having every human experience. And through these experiences, through this growth, we expand our consciousness. And through this expansion of consciousness, we ultimately recognize the unity of all beings, that we are truly one with every other. We recognize the need to help others, while we also recognize that this life is just one of many.
Hi.
Hey.
My name's Maureen. I'm glad that you touched on that paradox, because that was I had already had questions as you started talking about the whole social justice thing, because that was fun this past year. But I work with a man from Nairobi who grew up, and we were talking about compassion and what it meant to be compassionate in a world. And that compassion, my belief is compassion is you're not changing their lives, you're living their lives with them. And he said, that's true. Most Americans don't think that way. And then he talked about how he grew up in a village in Nairobi. And he would go to school. He walked several miles to school with no shoes on his feet. And when he came home, he was running. He was so happy. He would just run in happiness. They didn't have much. They lived in a hut. And then people came in and said, "You are poor," and changed their perspectives. So, as you talk about reincarnation, and but we're learning, and we have to go through all these experiences in order to learn. But then on the other hand, we're talking about this paradoxical conundrum, I guess, of no, we have to go change everything. Have you questioned that in your head, and what was your answer to yourself when you did that?
So
sorry about the lengthy. I had to preface it with my story. So
yeah, no, I get that. And yes, I have actually thought of that. And as I mentioned at the beginning, I don't have any answers.
Oh,
sorry, I start off with that on purpose because inevitably somebody wants an answer. But it is a paradox. But aren't the most important questions in life paradoxical? They really are. And so working for social justice doesn't mean going to somebody's village and saying, "Hey, you guys are poor,"
and changing their whole world.
And changing their world. No. Social justice is about saying, "Hey, domestic violence is not okay. How are we going to educate people to know that this is not okay? Is it okay if a child is starving? No, it's not."
It's almost like we just sit here and instead of observing the universe and learning from it, we're trying to change the universe. And what makes us think? I'm sorry, you probably can't answer that either. And he gave me the microphone. I was just talking out loud. But
and I would agree with you. I don't think there is an answer. But I know that personally for myself.
I'm gonna quit coming here.
I think what she said, just in case anybody didn't hear that, she laughed and said, "I'm going to quit coming here because he took the microphone away." I think one of the things is that we each have to answer that question for ourselves. And for me, I didn't go to school all those years to eat my lunch, just to eat my lunch. No, I'm teasing you. For me, I cannot sit still and not do something to correct a social injustice. I'm going to work for it. But what I'm not going to do, hopefully, is be attached to the outcome, because I have no control over the outcome. Okay? I have no control over that outcome. What I personally feel like I have to do is to work to right the ills of the world to the best of my ability, okay, because that's what I need to do, but not have expectations about how that's going to turn out in the long run. Because no, if one person or even a group of people could go and make the world perfect, wouldn't we do that? Today, right now? Absolutely. But we can't. So.
There are a couple of questions from people watching through the internet. The first one is, I am a firm believer in reincarnation, but how do I keep my past life from infringing on this life?
I will say that we are this, from my perspective, because that's the only thing I can speak from. From my perspective, I am the sum of everybody and everything that I've experienced from whenever, when I was that little tiny bud. Okay, so it's infringing might not be the word that I would use, but it's a part of who I am. It is a part of who I am. I think that there are some people who remember their past lives or who have pushed to remember past lives, and that kind of impacts them. So I'm not sure if that's what this individual is talking about. But if so, focusing on today, focusing on this life, and saying, that's past. I've done that. Now I'm here. That's really probably the only way I can answer that, given that kind of information.
And one other question. How can I benefit from the lessons which I have learned in this reincarnation if I cannot remember those lessons in my future reincarnations?
Well, and that's a good question. I think people do wonder that. When we really learn something, it's just there for us, isn't it? If I asked you to give us, to say the alphabet, you could probably all recite the alphabet without thinking about it, couldn't you? Well, if I learned something in a previous incarnation, if I really learned it, then it's a part of who I am. It's like the ABCs. It's just there. It's a part of who I am. So I don't have to remember from life to life. In fact, we're encouraged in a lot of the literature not to try to remember our past lives. And it's said that the reason that we don't really remember them for the most part is because it interferes with what we're working on right now. So we just work on what's in front of us. One step, one day at a time. We just keep going, learning and growing, expanding. And it will be a part of us.
Hi, I think that, well, thank you for everything so far. It has been very helpful. Well, a comment, I think it's a segue to both the prior things, is actually, if you look at the work of Brian Weiss, that, and that question from the internet about the past infringing on the present. I mean, I fell into this through Jim Tucker, too, and reading his things. I'm a pediatrician, so I was intrigued, and of course did not, as much as I would have liked, a strong Christian, all that, but I mean, I've gone a whole different route since then, and it still ties into my faith greatly. But I guess the question, part of the answer, I think, is what he says, too. It's in what you said, that people, try not to let the past maybe infringe. Well, a lot of people's past infringes to make this life sometimes not tolerable or very difficult, or there's a lot of stumbling blocks. And what I've read through Brian Weiss is that, especially in the area of phobias, he really helps people release some of that by tapping into their past lives, so that then they then can move on in this life without having the burden of some of those tough things, dying. In your Kevin's case, too. I mean, maybe letting go of some of that. So I don't know where all that ties into all this, but I think it's fascinating, and I'm glad people are, like Brian Weiss, like Jim Tucker, like Ian Stevenson. I'm glad that there's people out there working on that.
That's right. There are a lot of people out there working, and continued study, continued reading, continued research, so that we can all come to our own understanding. And I think one of the things about being on the spiritual path is learning to live sometimes without an answer. Sometimes we have to live in uncertainty.
There's a really good movie I came out earlier in the year. I think it's called A Dog's Life. And it takes you through like 5 or 6 lives of a dog reincarnated. So that was pretty neat. But I heard a theory that, like 7 billion people in the world. But I heard a theory that souls travel in groups. It's like, it's like we're not doing all 7 billion. There's maybe 20 or what, I don't know what the number is. But have you heard that?
Yeah, I certainly have. I mean, like you and like many of you, I've read a number of different theories, different ideas, different perspectives. I love the work of Brian Weiss. I love the work of Jim Tucker and Ian Stevenson. It's fascinating to me. And yes, I have heard that. I've often wondered if my family and I aren't one of those groups that kind of travel together because we are so close. I don't know, as a mental health practitioner, I could say enmeshed. So, where's the difference there? I don't know. Are we a group that travels together, or are we just, psychologically enmeshed? I don't know. But again, those are things to think about. But I think for me, it's really that whole component of continued study, continued research, and feeling what's right for us. And I have to tell you that what is right for me, what feels right to me now, is not actually what felt right to me when I was 20. And hopefully will not feel right to me when I'm 80. Hopefully I will continue to study and to learn and to grow and have different ideas. But along with that is that willingness to be in a place of uncertainty and say, I don't really get this, but I'm going to keep going.
Whenever I hear reincarnation talked about, there's always the idea that we've had past lives, but with population growth, is it possible that you're meeting people and interacting with people that it's their first incarnation? I
don't know the answer to that. I've certainly read that is an accurate statement. I've also read that because we are coming to a time in the spiritual evolution of humanity as a whole, that there are many souls that are trying to be incarnated right now to do what they need to do to be able to keep going. So, I'm going to tell you a story, and I'm going to read it because I don't want to miss any of the pieces to it. And some of you have probably heard this, and so I apologize for the repetition, but I think it's worth hearing again because every time I hear it, every time I read it, I learn something new. It's called The Egg by Andy Weir. You were on your way home when you died. It was a car accident. Nothing particularly remarkable, but fatal nonetheless. You left behind a wife and 2 children. It was a painless death. The EMTs tried their best to save you, but to no avail. Your body was so utterly shattered, you were better off, trust me. And that's when you met me. What happened to me? You asked. Where am I? You died, I said matter-of-factly. No point in mincing words. There was a truck and it was skidding. Yep, I said. I died? Yep, But don't feel bad about it. Everybody dies, I said. You looked around. There was nothingness, just you and me. What is this place? You asked. Is this the afterlife? More or less, I said. Are you God? You asked. Yep, I'm God. My kids, my wife, you said. Well, what about them? Will they be all right? Now, that's what I like to see, I said. You just died and your main concern is for your family. That's good stuff right there. You looked at me with fascination. To you, I didn't look like God. I just looked like some man or possibly a woman, some vague authority figure maybe, more of a grammar school teacher than the Almighty. Don't worry, I said, they'll be fine. Your kids will remember you as perfect in every way. They didn't have time to grow contempt for you. Your wife will cry on the outside, but be secretly relieved. To be fair, your marriage was falling apart. If it's any consolation, she'll feel very guilty for feeling relieved. Oh, so what happens now? Do I go to heaven or hell or something? Neither, I said. You'll be reincarnated. Oh, so the Hindus were right, you said. All religions are right in their own way, I said. Walk with me. You followed along as we strode through the void. Where are we going? Nowhere in particular. It's just nice to walk while we talk. So what's the point then? You asked. When I get reborn, I'll just be a blank slate, right? A baby? So all my experiences and everything I did in this life won't matter? Oh, not so, I said. You have within you all the knowledge and experiences of all your past lives. You just don't remember them right now. I stopped walking and took you by the shoulders. Your soul is more magnificent, beautiful, and gigantic than you can possibly imagine. A human mind can only contain a tiny fraction of what you are. It's like sticking your finger in a glass of water to see if it's hot or cold. You put a tiny part of yourself into the vessel, and when you bring it back out, you've gained all the experiences it had. You've been in a human for the past 48 years, so you haven't stretched out yet and felt the rest of your immense consciousness. If we hung out here for long enough, you'd start remembering everything. But there's no point to doing that between each life. How many times have I been reincarnated then? Oh, lots. Lots and lots. And in lots of different lives. This time around, you'll be a Chinese peasant girl in 540 AD. What? You're sending me back in time? Well, I guess technically. I mean, time as you know it only exists in your universe. Things are different where I come from. Where you come from, you said? Oh, sure. I come from somewhere else. And there are others like me. I know you'll want to know what it's like there, but honestly, you wouldn't understand. Oh, you said, feeling a little let down. But wait, if I get reincarnated to other places in time, I could have interacted with myself at some point. Sure, happens all the time. And with both lives only aware of their own lifespan, you don't even know it's happening. So what's the point of it all? Seriously, I asked. Seriously? You're asking me for the meaning of life? Isn't that a little stereotypical? Well, it's a reasonable question, you persisted. I looked you in the eye. The meaning of life, the reason I made this whole universe, is for you to mature. You mean mankind. You want us to mature. No, just you. I made this whole universe for you. With each new life you grow and mature and become a larger and greater intellect. Just me? What about everybody else? There is no one else. In this universe, There's just you and me. You stared blankly at me. But all the people on earth, all you, different incarnations of you. Wait, I'm everyone? Now you're getting it. I'm every human being who ever lived, or will ever live, yes. I'm Abraham Lincoln. Yes, and you're John Wilkes Booth, too, I added. I'm Hitler? You said, appalled. Yes, and you're the millions he killed. I'm Jesus? And you're everyone who follows him. You fell silent. Every time you victimize someone, you are victimizing yourself. Every act of kindness you've done to yourself. Every happy and sad moment ever experienced by any human was or will be experienced by you. You thought for a long time, why? Why do all this? Because someday you will become like me, because that's what you are. You're one of my kind. You're my child. Whoa, you mean I'm a god? No, not yet. You're a fetus. You're still growing. Once you've lived every human life throughout all time, you will have grown enough to be born. So the whole universe, it's just an egg, I answered. Now, it's time for you to move on to your next life, and I sent you on your way. A short story by Andy Weir. I think, well, I'm not saying that it's the truth, but I think it sort of puts some things into perspective for us, doesn't it? About reincarnation and about why we're here and about the one unity. The one unity, which is really at the base and the core of absolutely everything. That we are all one. And every time we're kind to someone, we're kind to ourselves. And every time we victimize someone, intentionally or not, it is again ourselves. Because we are one.
You must have read my mind. It was probably a quick read, but it was a comment. And trying to explain to people, I've always said that we're drops in the same glass, drops of water. And what affects the top drop? And recently I've read and thought that it's more appropriate to say we're not a drop in the ocean, we are the ocean. And I just wanted to make that comment. But moving on, I wanted to also say that in regards to maybe something impeding you in this present life, what you resist persists. I always had problems wearing a collar, very tight collar. Well, I couldn't be a businessman. I am in the trades. And then it was made aware to me that I was possibly hanged in a previous life. I have no problems with collars anymore.
See? There you go. And you probably were. We probably all were at some point. Scary thought, but probably true. Yes, ma'am. Oh, John's behind you. Sorry.
I'm going to piggyback on that. I'm a medium, an intuitive, and a psychic. And for the past 5 years, I've been gifted now with picking up past lives on people. And it happens when they need it. Mm-hmm. If they come in for a reading and something comes up from their past life, it's because they had a trauma in a past life that's affecting them in this life. It could be a fear of driving over a bridge, finding out that that person was a greaser in her previous life and was racing and ended up going off a cliff. Mm. So it does affect you in this life, but it is absolutely amazing.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that.
What would need to transpire in the world for more understanding and acceptance of the reincarnation perspective?
That's a really good question. If I had the answer to that, I would put it in a bottle and sell it. I think the fact that we're here, the fact that we're talking about it, increases the knowledge. I think the more willing we are to talk about our beliefs, to not push them down, I kind of regret, I don't regret much in this life, because I try to take everything and learn from it. But I wish that probably I had been more outspoken about my beliefs in reincarnation, my belief system as a whole, because in retrospect, so what if they thought I was crazy? So what? So I think talking about it, sharing it, is one of the ways to get that out there. I love your jacket, by the way. My sister has one just like it.
Does she?
Yes.
I think, too, validating with children. Some of my grandchildren came in very clearly remembering past lives. And rather than telling them it was a dream, like you might tend to do, just explaining in simple terms what reincarnation is, and that very likely that is what you're remembering. And then they have that little seed, however far they decide to take it. But I think validating it instead of dismissing it is really important.
I love that. Yes, absolutely. Validating the statements, because how do we know? How do we know? I love that.
I guess something that would be very helpful for me, just, it's a very Christian community here, and I consider myself a strong Christian, and I guess how it's not always safe. No. So when you say to bring it up, I'm not sure, I have to think about why would I bring it up, because I know I'm not going to change somebody necessarily. I understand social justice, and I'm totally with you on that one. But I think this issue of bringing up it's a fairly new thing for me. I've always, from the Christian perspective, believe it, but it's a little different twist now. I go to a church, and actually it feels much more alive now that I have this other understanding. But I guess I would like to hear what you have to say about, in a very, perhaps non-tolerant Christian community, how do you diplomatically or share that? And I don't know.
Yes. And that's how I grew up, in a very traditional, small community where it was really unsafe to share beliefs. And when I share my beliefs, it's not in order to convince someone else that I'm right. I may think I'm right, but I don't know that for sure. I don't know what is true and what's not true. But I think that there will be times for all of us when the opportunity will arise. And so we can share what is appropriate in that setting to the degree that it's appropriate. So with someone, I can't think off the top of my head of an example of that, but you'll know if the time is right. But just to go out and share it, no, I probably wouldn't, because it would only upset people and offend people. And then if there ever did come a time when you could share it, sort of just where it just sort of grows and becomes appropriate to share, then they wouldn't be there to listen. So being cautious about that, I think. So that's really not an answer for you. But I think that's probably what I personally would do, is just wait until that opportunity came. And then it would just be based with I statements. I believe. It's my perspective.
So, I'm sorry. So when you say, are you looking for people to share this insight with and to kind of learn and grow in it? Is that why you are asking the question? Are you asking the question because you're looking for people to grow with in that and talk to about, because you've been encountered with this? So my mom was a I shouldn't say was yet. But she always said that when people are ready, that the philosophies and the ideals of Theosophy will come to them. And if they're not ready, they'll ignore it. So if you've had lifetimes with it. So there are people there, and when you're ready and they're ready, they'll enter your world. But I guess the thing I'm asking is why do you feel like you need to do that? To share. So I don't need the answer. I really don't care about the answer, but...
Question, because you asked that, though. So there was...
Wait for John. Wait for the... I'm catching on, John. I may not know the procedure, but I'm catching on with the microphone.
You're doing much better than I am.
So I guess one thing I'll have to say that the quote about what you told me is when the student is ready, the teacher appears, so to speak.
That's what
Good.
So my mom used to say that too,
right.
so.
So I guess the bigger question for me is I have 5 children, and so, you know, one of my daughters commented to somebody who helps me every now and then, "Oh, Mom believes in reincarnation." She says, "Oh, she does, so that's not in the Bible," you know, and so, and I really love this person that she said it to, but I have to say all my neighbors, I'm sure, would have that same response. So I'm okay to face the fire. I'm a big girl, and I'm a good person, and I, you know, believe what I believe, and I think it's good and healthy, and it's been a long journey. But my children can be, they may not be invited, perhaps, at some point, or, you know, even this wonderful person that I love who said that to my daughter, you know, I just don't want them to pay for my beliefs, so to speak, that, you know, or do I tell them, oh, you know, this is what I believe in, I think it's healthy and good, and just keep it, you know, I wouldn't talk about this with your friends.
Yeah. They will. It's so interesting, you know. It's tough. I was, Daniel, were you? Yes, okay. So while it's headed back to Daniel, I'll just say that my son, who's raised in a Theosophical family, goes to a very traditional church. If you're listening, son, I'm talking about you again. And so one day we were talking about his church, and I said, do they think I'm going to hell, you know, for my beliefs? And he said, yeah, they probably would, but I don't. And I said, good, I don't either. So yeah, it's a challenge, you know, and so my son, I'm not sure what really he believes, because I don't, you know, he's an adult, I don't ask that. But he knows what I believe for sure. And so it can be tough at times.
I'd like to share something I heard about reincarnation that kind of made sense and is kind of funny to me. I don't know from what tradition this comes, but they say if you commit suicide, you're immediately reincarnated. It's like you don't get out that easily. So I just thought that was kind of funny.
Yeah, and there's a lot of discussion about what happens with that. And I'm not going to start that discussion because I know we'll run out of time, but I would encourage people to Veronica, you wanted to say something? Okay, I'm sorry. Veronica kind of stretches, so I'm going to make sure she was asking a question, not stretching. But that, you know, that's an important topic to do some research about.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment about sharing. There's some practices that we have back at home in California that maybe aren't recognized or acknowledged or accepted in other communities. And so what I've learned is really looking at discernment. You know, what is the point of sharing it? And also thinking of myself as an interpreter, messenger. So do I have to use the word reincarnation, right? So there's certain ideas that I'd like to share with people, but I won't share them in the words that I learned them in. I try to translate it for that person in their paradigm. So
how very wise. I think Veronica should be our next speaker.
I was thinking the same thing along those lines. It's like this presentation could have started with that.
Yes, it could have, couldn't it?
And you could have approached a much wider group of people with different backgrounds, because that unity of life is a common thread through various religions. If you build on the unity of life and you build on an afterlife type of thing, the progression towards saying a learning process that allows for this reincarnation isn't such a big stretch.
Yes, yes, thank you.
And to me, the only thing that I have to struggle with a little bit is the ego. But what you described was the divine spirit, which can be all of us learning over and over. So that's fine with me.
Yes. Thank you. I'm trying to avoid these question things.
Yeah, I won't ask you a question.
Thank you. Thank you.
I just wanted to share something. I gave a talk. I think it was on karma, but you know, karma and reincarnation are so connected to each other, and when I was preparing the talk, I was pondering this whole question of reincarnation and looking out my window. And for me, it's very difficult to not believe in reincarnation. Not because I'm a Theosophist from through and through, because like Barbara, I'm a fourth generation. It just runs in the blood. But because if you look at nature, a tree comes from another tree. You know, if we believe that the divinity lives in everything, if it surrounds everything, and it's in us, then it would be a natural process that no different than like a tree that decays and becomes fertilizer and helps another tree grow and helps everything else grow. Why not us?
Exactly.
Why are we any different from nature? Because we're part of nature. So I just wanted to share that because that thought always ran through my head, and it just confirmed for me that it's impossible not for me not to believe in reincarnation.
And the last question, I have one question here and then another one. Isn't reincarnation sort of like being in a school of lives?
Ooh, that's a beautiful analogy. Yes, that is rhetorical, so that's a comment. That's a comment. Thank you for that comment.
Hi there, my name is Cindy Bill, and thank you very much for your talk. I really appreciated it. The work and you brought up social justice, and it seems to be a theme, and one of the attractions I have to this place is social justice. The work I do is in social work. I don't know how I was led down this path of working in crisis intervention, post-acute trauma, domestic violence, sexual assault, seeing the things that we see in this work, and how, as a group with cohorts, at the end of the day, we can still have hope. And how is it that with our clients, our patients, our victims that are now survivors and hopefully thrivers, how can we instill that hope, that unity, that, yes, this horrible thing has happened to you, but on the other end, there is something good.
Yeah.
So, and you've had those days in practice where the next day it's hard to push the reset button and we get all, unconditional positive regard about our work, to do over. And some days it is just a do over. And I praise your work here. I praise the work of the Theosophical Society and what they're trying to do to maybe make that balance in some of the injustices that are out there. And maybe, this organization and the work of others, can maybe tilt that balance,
Yes.
The karma dharma, the yin, the yang, the balance, a restoration of balance.
Harmony.
Thank you.
Harmony. Thank you. Thank you. I was going to say, aren't you impressed that I could talk about reincarnation for so long and never once mention karma? It was not easy. That's another talk for another time. John keeps emailing me and saying, will you talk? So I have to save something for later. Well, thank you so much. You're very kind to me, and I really appreciate that. And I just encourage all of us just to keep searching, keep going. We're all in this together. Thank you.